Great. I suppose that's okay. For this episode only, the ring light will be off because I think there's still a decent amount of light on my face because it's sunnier than hell outside. Hello, Jacksonites. What an intro. Welcome to the second episode of Super Ultra Binge. And today I will be discussing a very special show. One of my man, you really can see everything that's going on in these shades. Hello. One of my all-time favorite TV shows and one of my favorite installments of the Ultraman franchise. With the original classic that started it all, even more than Ultra Q, the original Ultraman from 1966. Yes, indeed. This is going to be a fun one. The original Ultraman, of course, came out in 1966. Hold on real quick. This was released, I think, not 2 weeks after Ultra Q ended. It ran from July 17th, 1966 to April 9th of 1967. Its premiere episode topped the average rating set by Ultra Q and kept climbing each week, making the show a success. And indeed, this show was a gargantuan success. It really was this show that kind of inadvertently led to the restructuring and the kind of cataclysm that was happening in the Japanese film business in the late 60s and late 60s and early mid 70s especially. But you know what? I really can't be mad at this show because it gave birth to one of my favorite franchises. And this, of course, is the 2019 Mill Creek Blu-ray release. But getting into my personal history of the original Ultraman, I, of course, me being a purist and completionist, and I did quickly learn that the original Ultraman, thankfully, was pretty readily available for viewing in the States, not just on YouTube, but especially there. Getting into the Ultraman franchise, oh, my screen's flickering. I think I need to turn on my ring light. So give me a sec. Clunk. There we go. Stay. Okay. That's better. Okay, so how I got into Ultraman originally, or how I would read. God, I can't fucking talk. How I would watch Ultraman for a long time initially when I got into the Ultraman franchise. Not to sound like one of those people, like one of those that only watches monster movies just for the monsters and they don't give two fucks about the human characters. Admittedly, I am sort of one of those people. Like, I'm not an asshole about it that just complains, oh, there's too much humans and not enough monsters. There are certain movies where, like, I think you can have a good balance. If you can have a good human story, but of course you can have a good monster story, and it's even better if those two blend together pretty well. But when I was younger, I was mostly just more interested in watching Ultraman transform and destroy giant monsters. That's what I was interested in at the time. So that summer that I talked about when I think it was, yeah, after 8th grade, after researching about the Ultra series and getting really, really, really excited, I wanted to check out what the franchise looked like. So that summer when I was at my mom's, I researched and looked up Ultraman on YouTube, and I came across a giant slew of fight scenes of Ultraman fighting giant monsters and giant aliens, and I was changed for good. Um, that's how I initially watched. I can't remember the name of a YouTube channel, but he had, at least at the time, almost the entire Ultraman franchise, at least all of the fight scenes, as short videos on his channel. And it was through him where I watched every single fight from the original Ultraman series and original Ultra 7 as well. And I was a changed kid. I fucking loved every second of it. And then I moved on from Ultra 7 to Jack, Ace, Taro, Tiga, Dinah, Gaia, Nexus, Mebius, and so on and so forth. So I was a changed man. But quickly, I decided I wanted to see if I could own any Ultraman. So I looked on Amazon.com and I was scrolling and looking around, and I discovered the original Mill Creek Ultraman box set. And I believe at the time this was only like $15. This is, I believe, the second release that Mill Creek did, because I think the first one, the series is 39 episodes long, and they released Ultraman in like 2 volumes with, I think, 20 episodes apiece. But then they released the complete series, all 39 episodes on 4 discs, and this is that. And this was the cheaper of the two. You know, I'm a bit frugal when it comes to watching movies and or buying movies and shows. Um, I don't really much care about quantity. I like to buy a lot of stuff, so I don't really mind buying an entire series on one set. Usually that is the cheaper route, but I don't mind buying cheaper sets from time to time, and this was one of those examples. Um, Mill Creek is pretty infamous for when they put out shows, that's it. They just put out the show on discs. Barely any special features, maybe barely any trailers, and no subtitles usually. Thankfully, because this is a Japanese show, they had they had no choice but to subtitle this show, and it does include the awful, atrocious English dub. But so yeah, I bought this, and I bought this along with the original Ultra 7 on Shout Factory. I'll show that whenever I review Ultra 7, and a couple volumes of the Ultraman Tiga series. But this is the one that I was the most excited for, because this was the one that I was admittedly the most interested in. So it took me a while, because it's kind of a curse with me. I tend to take a while to watch shows, but I eventually did watch the entire series, not just the fight scenes, and I was very happy. It was very surreal. I remember when I first got this in the mail and I started watching it, it was so strange to finally be able to watch an entire Ultraman show. Because again, keep in mind, Ultraman was very rare on home media in the States at the time. This was 2013 or 20, no, maybe even like 2012, 2013 or so when I got this series on DVD. And but yeah, by the time it was over, I was very happy. I've rewatched this show at least 5 times, and I've rewatched a handful of episodes several times since then. But from beginning to end, I've watched all 39 episodes at least 5 times. And I've watched another review of this series, Goji73's Color Timer Reviews, uh, where he reviews all 39 episodes within 3 minutes. Um, So, and that's a pretty good little series. It sums up the series pretty damn well. He did a great job. I wish he would do more, but that was back in 2016, and he hasn't done shit since with the Ultraman franchise. But whatever. Beside the point. So, and then of course, I haven't cracked this open, but I'm sure it looks just fine. I have not watched this release, but of course I bought it when Mill Creek started putting these out. Because as I said yesterday, even either the shows that I've seen or the shows that I'm not super interested in, I'm gonna slurp these up because I don't want to risk at some point down the line I do want to get them, but they're out of print. But still, this is a very nice release. And obviously, this is Ultraman, the original Ultraman on the front here. This is what he looks like. So yeah, that's my personal history. As I've stated, it's one of my favorite shows of all time. It's one of my favorite installments of the Ultraman franchise. Not in quite top tier, in my opinion, because I do love the show, but it unfortunately does. I'm way a much bigger fan of it than I am of Ultra Q. Let me get that out of the way. It is one of my favorite shows, but it is pretty rough around the edges, as I'll explain later. But still, it's not quite top tier, but it is one of my favorites. It's a very good start for the Ultraman franchise. Like with yesterday, I'm going to read off some certain key episodes because this is a very formulaic series. And this is the general format. I think I've said this before, but here's the general format. Ultraman, an Ultraman episode goes out like this. Set up certain situations the characters are in. Then a monster shows up and starts causing havoc. The military tries to fight it. It doesn't work. The Earth Defense Force tries to come in, tries to fight it, and that doesn't work. And then the main character transforms into Ultraman. Ultraman fights Monster, defeats Monster, and the episode. That is the format of every episode of an Ultraman series. It is very formulaic, and it can get pretty tedious and tiresome at times. However, though, if you're a big monster movie fan like me or a lot of other people, you just eat this shit up. Though that is the biggest reason why Super Ultra Binge is going to be very sporadic, because it can get pretty tedious and tiresome to watch 39, 45, 50 episodes of kind of the same thing over and over and over again. But still, so I'm going to read off certain key episodes of the original Ultraman. Episode 1, also directed by Hajime Tsuburaya. I don't think Hajime Tsuburaya was as involved in the director's chair as he was in Ultra Q, because looking through here, he directed episode 1, 8, 12, 13, 26, 27, 38, and 39. I think that's like 6 episodes for the whole series. Damn. Excuse me. Also, part of my nose, my hay fever has just been absolutely insane this year. If it's not laundry dust, it's pollen. If it's not pollen, it's dust at work that sets off my allergies. So pardon me if my voice sounds a little nasally. Episode 1, Ultra Operation Number 1. Strange illuminated spheres streak over Lake Ryugamori, a red orb chasing a blue orb, both being tracked by Agent Hayata of the Science Special Search Party, also known as the Science Patrol, this being the Earth Defense Force that fights against monsters. Trying to keep up with their tremendous speed, the red sphere collides with Hayata's aircraft in midair. Hayata is resurrected by a towering silver and red humanoid from the Land of Light in the Nebula M78, who merges with the Earthman and bestows upon him the Beta Capsule, a device that will allow him to transform his shape at will. Thought dead, Hayata rejoins his teammates as they plan to deal with a monster named Bemular that has emerged from the second sphere. Episode 2, Shoot the Invader. A UFO is caught by radar over Tokyo. This is the first alien episode of the series. Captain Muramatsu sends Arashi to investigate. He reports that alien creatures have frozen all those within, while Muramatsu holds off the military until a dialogue can be established with the aliens and Hayata arrives. A nervous Ide clumsily attempts first contact, speaking through Arashi. Alien Baltan relates mad scientists destroyed their planet. Hayata offers them a chance to settle on Earth through the Baltans, although the Baltans, all 2.3 billion of them, have already decided on conquest. Only Ultraman stands in their way, repelling them with his Specimen beam. He decloaks their ship and destroys it, dooming the Baltans but saving humanity. Episode 7, The Blue Stone of Bari. After teams from the Middle East and Indian branches of the Science Patrol disappear while searching for a meteorite in Turkey, the Japan branch is dispatched with a representative from Paris headquarters. Soon after finding the meteorite, Ide sees a giant monster rise out of the ground, and they stumble upon the pit of a giant insect creature littered with plane wreckage. Escaping its clutches, the team discovers the lost town of Baradi, where a statue holding a blue stone has kept the monster Antlar at bay for 5,000 years. When Antlar attacks Baradi, Ultraman's Specium Ray fails and it overwhelms him, but with the help of the Science Patrol, Ultraman is able to overcome. Episode 8, The Lawless Monster Zone, or the Monster Anarchy Zone. After massive volcanic activity, a survey team is sent back to their facilities on Tatara Island. When all contact is lost, the Science Patrol is sent to investigate. They discover Tatara overrun with violent monsters, none more so than the horrifying Red King. Thrown from a cliff during the melee, Hayata is left behind as Captain Muramatsu goes for help. Meanwhile, Arashi, Ide, and Fuji encounter a kind creature called Pigmon, Garadama from Ultra Q, repurposed into a different character, which has left traces of the missing men for them to find, leading them to the sole survivor. Red King manages to find them, however, forcing Pigmon to distract the monster with his dying breath, allowing Ultraman to arrive and defeat Red King. Episode 10, The Mysterious Dinosaur Base. The Science Patrol investigates sightings of a monster at Lake Kitayama, where the fish population has recently exploded. Also nearby is the mansion of Professor Nakayama, an expert on prehistoric creatures who has secretly grown the beast now living at the bottom of the lake. Sounds very familiar. It turns out that the doctor is really Professor Nikaido, a paleontologist who went missing at Loch Ness years earlier. Unmasked, he captures Kubo and Ide and threatens to feed them to his beloved Gyros. Ide races to repair his communicator, and the pair are narrowly rescued after Nikaido is ironically trampled by his own creation. Ultraman arrives and soundly defeats Gyros through the use of the Ultra Slash. Not really, but that sounds like Terra Mechagodzilla. A lot. Episode 13, Oil SOS, one of the weakest episodes of the series. After a series of mysterious oil refinery disasters, a gasoline truck on a Tokyo Bay dock explodes in the dead of night. The only witness, a drunken dock worker, claims that a sea monster was responsible, but he is dismissed, at least until Pestar, the oil monster, attacks an oil tanker in broad daylight. Captain Muramatsu plans to lure it out to sea, but with the situation grim, Hayata transforms into Ultraman to stop Pestar. After a tough fight, Ultraman then turns his attention on the fire, helping Ide extinguish it with high-pressure water produced from his hands, the Ultra Water Stream, as it's referred to as. Episode 16, Science Patrol into Space, featuring the return of Alien Baltan from Episode 3. The Science Patrol closely monitors the launch of the first Venus expeditionary rocket, engineered and piloted by Professor Mori. All systems are go until communications are interrupted. An alien race, the Baltans, announce they are preparing a counterattack to destroy the Science Patrol and Ultraman. On high alert, Muramatsu, Hayata, and Arashi go to rescue Mori, but possessed by a Baltan, Mori causes the space VTOL to crash on the alien Baltan's planetoid. The Baltans again begin their attack on Tokyo, and destroying the Baltan possessing Mori, Ultraman uses teleportation to fight the threat back on Earth. Episode 19, Demons Rise Again. The Science Patrol investigates a metal cylinder unearthed at a construction site, which Professor Fukuyama speculates is over 350,000 years old and left behind by a highly advanced civilization. With this proverbial Pandora's box, they find a container with a strange blue liquid and a reflective metal plate, but something is missing. The missing container ends up at a dump site, and when struck by lightning, transforms into the crimson monster Banila. The blue container is then unleashing the blue monster Ouroboros, and the two monsters converge at the National Stadium and begin to fight. When Ouroboros melts Banila with his acid foam, Ultraman arrives and is nearly defeated himself. Episode 25, The Mysterious Comet Suifon. Astronomers discover a rogue comet designated Suifon on a collision course with Earth. All nuclear weapons are stored to prevent exposure, but 6 go missing. The Science Patrol sorties to recover the weapons. As the comet passes and the world rejoices, Guigas, a snow monster, appears in the Japanese Alps. While engaging the monster from the air, a second monster, Dorako, emerges from the comet and attacks. Unable to take them on separately, Hayata, Ide, and Arashi manage to lure monsters to fight each other. As Ide tries to secure the missing bombs, they are swallowed by a third monster, Red King 2, that bursts to the surface. Episodes 26 and 27 are a two-parter, the first of the franchise. The Prince of Monsters, Parts 1 and 2. Directed by Hajime Tsuburaya, of course. Professor Nakaya is on the trail of the Gomorasaurus, otherwise known as the monster Gomora. He intends to capture and display the creature at the upcoming World Exposition. Sounds like Gamera versus Jiger. He is assisted by Captain Muramatsu and Arashi of the Science Patrol, who use a newly developed anesthesia to bring down the monster for transport. During the last leg of the transport, however, the monster stirs awake and threatens to bring down all 3 jet VTOLs. With no other option, Muramatsu orders the monster dropped over the Rocco Mountains, 6,500 feet. Gamora is challenged by Ultraman, who loses the beta capsule. And during this commotion, Gamora manages to defeat and escape Ultraman's clutches. But in part 2, Osamu, a boy who witnessed the battle between Ultraman and Gamora, decides the beta capsule he found on the battlefield should be turned over to the Science Patrol. The monster rises in the center of Osaka, and during the fight, the Science Patrol attaches the tracer and separates Gamora from his powerful tail, driving him back underground. Gamora reemerges and destroys the Osaka castle. All seems lost until Osamu finds Hayata and returns the beta capsule. Hayata transforms into Ultraman, and Gamora is soundly dismembered and defeated. Episode 28, The Human Specimens 5 and 6. While investigating a series of mysterious bus crashes along the Hyuga Pass, Muramatsu and Ide encounter a strange spatial phenomenon. Even though the bus plunges off a cliff, all the passengers are accounted for and escape serious injury. At the hospital, a member of the Cosmic Rays Research Institute warns authorities about an alien who has infiltrated the institute before he is dematerialized before their eyes. The alien is hard to isolate because it is capable of changing its face as it materializes from place to place. Ultraman scares alien Dada with the Specimen ray before using the weapon to destroy the creature once and for all. Episode 33, The Forbidden Words. Contrary to previous alien beings, the being known as Alien Mephiles doesn't want to conquer or invade the Earth, but rather to possess it for himself. Fuji is transformed into a mindless giant, and a number of horrors from Ultraman's past are revived, all to intimidate the humans into accepting this new arrangement. Hayata himself is paralyzed while trying to transform into Ultraman. Mine too. Mephiles tells a boy he will grant him anything in the cosmos for the Earth, but is refused. Frustrated, alien Mephiles threatens the humans with destruction, but a fight with Ultraman ends in a tie. Conceding to Ultraman, Mephiles promises to return. Anthony Sarkis here is saying Mephiles is probably my favorite alien of the series. Mine too. And finally, the final episode, episode 39, Farewell Ultraman. More than 4 decades of unresolved flying saucer sightings are revealed to have been advanced scouts of the alien Zeton race. After destroying all orbital satellites, the Zeton mothership and her escorts advance on Japan. While Muramatsu, Hayata, Arashi, and Ide sortie against the Armada, an Invader disguised as Professor Iwamoto attacks Fuji and sets the Science Patrol command room on fire. The mothership appears, unleashing Zeton, the space dinosaur. Not really. After a great battle, Zeton defeats Ultraman. The day seems lost until the real Professor Iwamoto reappears. Ultraman's colleague, Ultraman Zophie, arrives to heal Ultraman, but that is not his only mission. Ultraman's time on Earth has come to an end. He separates Hayata from the Ultra and returns Ultraman to the Land of Light in the Nebula M78. Zeton is defeated, and the Earth, for now, is safe, ending the series on kind of a bittersweet note, but a good one nonetheless. So that's select episodes of the original Ultraman, but the series overall, that is the general progression and formula. Monster arrives, military fights it, Ultraman fights it, Ultraman kills it, end of the episode. Excuse me. That's the general plot, and those are probably the most key episodes of the entire series. It shows a good progression throughout the series overall. So let me see. Let's talk about some production stuff. Oh, damn. Excuse me. Hang on. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor. There's actually a lot of production shit that I could talk about. Development for the series. So I'll talk about this first. Due to the success of Ultra Q, TBS wanted a new monster-themed show from Subaraya Productions. This time filmed in color, this being the very first show from Subaraya Productions to be filmed in color. Eiji Tsuburaya and writer Tetsuo Kinjo chose to take the basic premise of Ultra Q about civilians and scientists dealing with monsters and have a group specifically created to deal with monsters and supernatural phenomena as the focus of the new show. The group was tentatively named the Science Investigation Agency. Tsuburaya and Kinjo decided to add unused ideas from Ultra Q and the rejected outline of another show called Woo. Tsuburaya had spent significant amounts of studio money to build his miniatures for the Godzilla films. The studio was desirous to monetize these miniatures and was looking for a project that could repurpose the sets and costumes from the Godzilla franchise. The first iteration of Ultraman was named Bemler. Bemler's human host would have been a 28-year-old man named Officer Sakomizu, described as a tough guy in early drafts. Captain Muramatsu would have been the only SIA member to know his secret identity. The name Bemler, sometimes trademarked as Bemular, was later given to Ultraman's first monster foe in the premiere episode. Pre-production and story layout for the show began in December of 1965 as Bemler Scientific Investigation Agency. Masahiro Yamada completed a sample teleplay titled The Birth of Bemler that featured an unused scenario originally written for Ultra Q. TBS producer Takashi Kakoi demanded to have Bemler be easily differentiated from other similarly designed monsters to avoid confusion. Tsuburaya and Kinjo then decided to make Bemler more humanoid in design, and Kakoi later requested that Bemler have a more metallic-based image. In January of 1966, the production's title was changed to Red Man due to the protagonist's color scheme. Of course. The following month, the show was unanimously approved for production, and in this version, Red Man arrives as a refugee on Earth after invaders destroyed his home planet. Kind of sounds like Superman. Red Man fuses with Officer Sakomizu, and together they protect the Earth from giant monsters and alien invaders. This version also featured an early version of the beta capsule called a flash beam, which resembled a futuristic fountain pen. During casting, TBS suggested casting actors that looked as Western as possible in order to appeal to overseas markets. It was later decided to add a female character to the SIA roster. Many of the cast members came from Toho, of course, more on that later. On March 2022 of 1966, the Copyright Office's approved registration of the show, now titled Ultraman. And there is many other changes that were made. Additional cast members were hired. And, of course, the show was released July 17th, 1966, and it was a gargantuan fucking success. So, yeah, and it would spawn the giant franchise that still is going on to this day. So, with all that being said, let me get into my pros and cons of the original Ultraman. I have 9 pros. Okay. Pro number 1 is the pacing of the show. Thankfully, unlike Ultra Q, gone is the slow, trippy, spooky, experimental pace of the first season. I'll just call it a season. Thankfully, that's all gone. This show is much more quickly paced. It's an action show and a special effects show, so naturally, it's going to be a much more quickly paced, much more to my tastes. The show, again, is very formulaic, but it's not a bad formula by any means, and it always moves at a fairly good pace. It never drags. It never chugs along. It's never slow. It's, in my opinion, though, it's never boring. It always moves along at a fairly brisk pace, which is nice. It makes this show very easy to watch, in my opinion, because there's always stuff going on. Pro number 2 is the cast, the Science Patrol specifically. There are 7 mostly recurring cast members over the course of the show. First, we have Susumu Kurobe as Shin Hayata / Ultraman. Susumu Kurobe doesn't play Ultraman in the suit, but Shin Hayata is Ultraman's human alter ego. Shin Hayata, he's not the leader, he's not the captain, obviously, but he does have a pretty high authority in the Science Patrol pecking order. But Susumu Kurobe does a great job as Shin Hayata. He's very likable. He's very pleasant. He's very warm. He's never he's never unlikable. He's never a jerk. He's never an asshole. He's just a very likable guy. He works hard. He gets along well with others. He's always on the lookout for protecting people. He takes his job seriously, but he knows how to have fun. He's just a very likable guy, and his chemistry with the rest of the cast is still overall, it's very, very strong. And I'm actually going to add a 10th pro, but more on that in a minute. Next, we have Akichi Kobayashi as Captain Toshio Muramatsu, the leader of the Science Patrol. He is played by Akichi Kobayashi, who would later go on to play, what's his name? The mentor guy. I'm totally drawing a blank. What is his name? Oh, he would go on to play Tobei Tachibana in the Kamen Rider franchise. The Showa series, that is. Oh, ouch, that's gotta suck. He wasn't that old when he died. Tobei Tachibana is the captain of this show. He's also very likable. He's very headstrong. He airs this aura of quiet authority. He's never difficult to get along with. He treats everybody fair, but he also proves himself to be a very skilled leader and a very skilled member of the Science Patrol. His chemistry with everybody else is really good. We have Sandayu Doku Mamushi as Daisuke Arashi. He's the trigger happy guy of this series. He's the one who's always running in guns a-blazing with the Science Patrol special guns. He's a fun character. He's likable. Not much is done with him, but still, he's always the one to start shooting whenever a monster shows up, so that's fun. We have Masanari Nihei as Matsuhiro Ide. He is the Science Patrol's engineer, but he's also the comedic relief. He's likable. He's funny. He's a little bit like Jar Jar Binks, where he's really goofy and slapsticky, and that's what they play off as being funny. But he actually can be funny at times. He's a very likable guy. And in my opinion, he never gets annoying. We have Hiroko Sakurai as Akiko Fuji, the sole female character in this series. She's likable. She's entertaining. She's just here to be... She's more like technical support. She's always answering phones and always relaying information over the radio. But she can fight monsters pretty good, and she works well with everybody else. Oh, yeah, she's a communications officer. That's what she's labeled as. And then finally, we have Dr. Iwamoto, the Science Patrol's scientific advisor, played by Toho alumni Akihiko Hirata. He's not in that many episodes. I think he's only in about 10, maybe 12 throughout the course of the show. But whenever he's on screen, he definitely has some good gravitas to him. And whenever you see him, like, hey, it's Dr. Serizawa in Ultraman. He's likable. He kind of embodies that typical scientist that's like, oh, I know everything about anything. But he's likable, and he works well with the Science Patrol whenever he's on screen. So overall, we have a good cast of characters here. None of them are annoying. None of them are unlikable. They're all fun to watch. You buy their chemistry. You can tell that these guys have spent a lot of time together. And as the series goes on, you do feel that family kindred spirit that a group gains when they've worked together for a long time. So, yeah, great cast here of human characters. Pro number 3, this is the quick one that I added. The tone of this show. It was in this series that the Ultra franchise really, not fully, but definitely started to really narrow down and set the stage for how the tone of the Ultraman franchise would be for the rest of the franchise. There would be certain installments that would go more darker and more mature approach, like the next series, for example, Ultra 7. But Ultraman is what really introduces the tone that Ultraman has. It feels very similar to a late 60s or early 70s Godzilla movie. More on that later. But I really believe Ultraman is similar, but still different from Showa Godzilla. Ultraman has never really been super dark and super serious. There are a couple shows that try to do that, but it's really with the original Ultraman that solidifies its tone. It's, in my opinion, the perfect balance of it takes itself seriously and like it knows when to not be comedic. It knows when to just be like, okay, we have a giant monster here. We need to figure out a way to stop it and destroy it before anybody else gets hurt. But it still has a lot of fun with itself, and it keeps that more whimsical, fantastical fun factor. It's a perfect mix of taking itself seriously, but also being fun. And it's with this series that it really solidifies that tone and is what I prefer for a majority of the rest of the franchise. There's a couple shows where I do like the more darker tone, but generally I like Ultraman when it's more like this series. It's a good balance of being fun and serious. Nothing wrong with that. Pro number 4 is Ultraman himself. Like I stated with my Kamen Rider review, if you have a superhero show and you have a great superhero, of course, you're golden. And Ultraman is certainly no exception. Ultraman is a very great lead character to get attached to. He's a great superhero to watch him destroy monsters. He's a lot of fun. He's a very skilled Ultraman. There's a lot of stuff that is cemented with Ultraman that the rest of the franchise would take advantage of. And he lays the groundworks for how an Ultra fights a monster. It's generally just using martial arts and wrestling moves, and then they finish off a monster with their various beam attacks. And Ultraman, of course, lays the groundwork. Ultraman himself is not my favorite Ultra, and I don't even really think he's in like a top 10 or even top 15 list of my favorite Ultras, but he still is a great hero. He's a lot of fun to watch, and he is certainly a very powerful Ultra. This booklet also includes kind of a little profile on Ultraman himself. Here he is right here. So his name is just Ultraman, but sometimes he's referred to as Ultraman Hayata, simply because he was the original Ultraman. But yeah, that's his design. And here's his physical attributes and some of his main special attacks. He is 40 meters tall. He weighs 35,000 tons. He can run at speeds of Mach 1 and fly at speeds of Mach 5. An alien of justice, and yes, the Ultras are aliens technically themselves. They're not robots. An alien of justice who came to Earth as an intergalactic defense force member from Nebula M78, the Land of Light, in pursuit of the space monster Bemular that escaped while being escorted to the monster graveyard. After crashing with Science Patrol member Hayata, Ultraman merged his life with Hayata's and decided to stay and fight for the peace of the Earth. He transforms via the Beta Capsule, a small pen-light-shaped item which Ultraman gave Hayata when he united with him. The enormous amount of energy of light stored to transform is condensed and stored in this item. His main special attacks, the catch ring, executed by converting energy used for attacking into defensing. Ultraman generates the energy by moving both hands horizontally over his head and creating a barrier of light by lowering them down. He basically traces a giant rectangular force field. The Ultra Psychic, by rapidly spinning his body, Ultraman releases multifold beam rings toward the enemy and incapacitates its movements by putting them in essentially a straitjacket, wrapping them up with rings of light. The Slash Beam That's not correct. Yeah, that's not correct at all. This manual is not right on that. The slash beam is when Ultraman fires like little arrowhead shaped energy slashes from his hand like this, that have slicing effects and explosive effects. Not used to kill, but mainly used to either stun or maim. The Ultra Attack Beam, a green spiral colored energy beam fired from Ultraman's fist, and then crossing his arms together and making the energy spark. Uh, yeah, this is probably his second strongest attack. Then we have the Ultra Slash by Ultraman can fire a buzzsaw shaped energy ring from his hand by doing this, firing it from this hand, and it can be used to completely bisect or bifurcate any opponent that Ultraman fires it at. He can fire one at a time to slice a monster clean in half, or he could even fire two to slice a monster into thirds. Showa Ultramen tend to really like to dismember their foes. And Ultraman's strongest and most famous attack being the Specimen Ray, a bluish white particle beam fired by crossing his arms like this, and the beam is fired from his hand, and it can destroy monsters either by an explosion or a fatal burn in usually one shot. There have been a couple monsters over the course of the show that could withstand and survive a shot from the Specimen Ray, but then Ultraman has to pull another technique up his sleeve to defeat that monster. There's a lot of other techniques that Ultraman has throughout the years, and even more Ultras in the future would have way more attacks up their sleeves. But that's the main roster of attacks that Ultraman has throughout that he uses throughout the series. Most times, Ultraman defeats a monster just with the Specimen Ray, but he's also no slouch in physical combat. And that was a big thing that initially got me interested in Ultraman to begin with, because I was also really into martial arts movies at the time. So I was like, ooh, a giant humanoid being that uses martial arts and internal, just using his hands to fire beam attacks to destroy monsters, Godzilla style. Gimme. And that's why I love it so much. Ultraman himself too would define his fighting style. So the suit actor who played Ultraman, it was a guy named Ben for no, hang on. Ben Furuya. I think he was a pretty tall guy, but he was also very skinny and lanky. He would, let me see. Now there's another. Hold on. Trying to find. Oh, here we go. Ben Furuya was chosen to play Ultraman due to his physical stature and proportions. Furuya trained in tap dancing, karate, judo, and he practiced the beam and shuach poses. Shuach is a word that Ultraman shouts whenever he jumps up into the air to fly. Shuach, and then he flies away. Ultraman does not, well, he can speak, but when he's transformed, he generally just makes vocalizations. He shouts, cries, grunts, and barks, but he can speak only 2 or 3 times throughout the series, and he speaks telepathically. Because, as you can see, Ultras have a mouth, but they don't move their mouth. They speak telepathically. But then, according to him, the Ultraman suits were destroyed after production wrapped, and due to the thinness of the suit, because obviously it's a rubber suit, but it's a lot thinner than a standard kaiju suit. So obviously it was very thin, and Furuya was prone to getting hurt a lot compared to other suit actors. And he claimed to always get hurt in one way or another. I believe it. But Ben does a great job playing Ultraman. You can definitely tell as the series goes on, his skill as a suit actor just improves and improves and improves. And honestly, he probably rivals Haruo Nakajima as a suit actor, in my opinion. So he does great. But yeah, Ultraman is a great superhero. He again, not my favorite, but a great introduction and a great first hero of the franchise. So Ultraman's great. Pro number 5 is like with Ultra Q, the Godzilla connective tissue. Again, there's a lot of props and a lot of sound effects, a lot of monster costumes were reused from Toho to create monsters for this series. Production designer Toll Narita designed all of the monsters for the show. Narita sometimes deviated from the original descriptions, and a majority of the time, the monsters did not include any specific. That's talking about the monsters. Hold on. Now, Ultraman does feature new monster suits. Several of them were created for the show, while others were recycled from Godzilla films and Ultra Q. Like, for example, the Baragon suit was which did Pagos and Ultra Q was repurposed for Niranga in episode 3, Gabora in episode 9, and Magular in episode 8. They're all different monsters, but you can clearly tell because really all they did was change the colors and add certain features to the Baragon suit, and of course change the head. Like with Niranga, they spray painted it dark green and light green and gave it a completely different head. With Gabora, they just spray painted it gray, gave it a graboid style head frill and a different head. And then with Magular, they spray painted it black and brown and added all these rock like textures all over the Baragon suit's back, and of course changed the head. They would also reuse a lot of roars as well. Like Niranga, for example, uses Varan's roar. Matter of fact, actually, I will also talk about this too. Pro number 6 is the monsters. So I think this booklet also includes select monsters. Okay, here we go. Well, that's aliens. Here we are. Niranga, Ragon, a giant version reused from Ultra Q. Green Mons, a plant monster. Gessera, a sea monster. Antlar, essentially a giant stag beetle. Chandlar, which is Pegea from Ultra Q, renamed and reused from Ultra Q. Gabora, Giras, oh boy, story about that. Gyango, which is a reused Bemular suit. Dodongo, Pestar, Gamakujira, Gavadon, Alien Balton, that's an alien, Alien Zarab, Banila, Oborus. Oborus also uses Varan's roar. Mine too. Hydra, a eagle dragon monster. Chemular, which uses Hidora's roar. Ironically, he's also a smog monster. Telesdon, a reptilian earthworm hybrid monster. Gubila, a giant narwhal sunfish monster. Dorako, Red King, two of them in here, a giant corn on the cob monster. Not really. It's like a giant reptilian kind of T-Rex monster. Zambalar, a fire combustion monster. Alien Mephiles, my favorite alien of the series. Zaragus, Gamora, Geronimon, and finally, also my favorite monster of the series, Zetun. I'll show you, hopefully, let's see, where is Zetun? Oh, I can show you Red King. Right there. That's Red King. And now there's no way. Oh, right here, that's Alien Boltan. And I have no way of showing you Zetun. But Zetun is my favorite monster. Well, I'm not really sure how it's pronounced. It's spelled Zetton. I've heard it pronounced Zeton. I've heard it pronounced Zeton. I've heard it even pronounced Zeton. I prefer Zetun. I just think that rolls off the tongue best. Zetun. But yeah, all the so going back to the Showa Godzilla connections, the biggest of all is in episode 10, the mysterious dinosaur base. Two Godzilla suits were recycled from Toho for the monster Jiros, with the head of the Godzilla suit from Ebirah Horror of the Deep placed on the body of the Godzilla suit from Mothra vs. Godzilla. The dorsal fins and other parts of the suit were sprayed yellow and green, and a large yellow Dilophosaurus-style frill was added to disguise the connection of the head with the body. Yeah. They straight up reused two Godzilla suits. It still looks like Godzilla to create an entirely new monster. And they just spray paint it yellow and green and give it a frill around its neck. That's it. It's one of the most strange and meta and what the fuck moments of the entire Ultraman franchise. And if you want, you could say that pretty much is the closest that the Ultraman franchise ever gets to a Godzilla and Ultraman crossover. Because literally in episode 10, a very Godzilla-looking monster fights Ultraman. It's a decent fight, yeah. And going back to the Godzilla connections, Haruo Nakajima would choreograph the fight scenes with Furuya and even played a few monsters, such as Niranga and Jiras, but he cameoed in episodes 24 and 33 as a police officer. And according to Anthony Sarkis here, he played Gabora and Kila, the giant insect monster from episode 38 as well. I don't think he played Zetun, though that's kind of a shame if he didn't. But he did a couple more. I know he did at least 10 episodes of the original Ultraman, but those are the most notable ones. Yeah, all the Showa Godzilla connections, it feels like a Showa Godzilla movie. They use a lot of actors from the Showa Godzilla series. They use a lot of props. Like they reuse the maser cannons a couple times in this show. They use a lot of sound effects and stock music from the Showa Godzilla series. They use roars and beam sound effects from the Showa Godzilla series, explosion sound effects. There is a lot of connective tissue between the original Ultraman and the Showa Godzilla series. Like I said about Ultra Q, this really makes Ultraman feel like an unofficial spin-off to the Showa Godzilla series. Again, like Ultra Q, it doesn't feel like a ripoff. It just feels like it's borrowing elements, but taking them over and still doing their own thing. That's the original Ultraman, in my opinion. Like I said, it feels similar, but it still does its own thing. And especially with how its tone is portrayed, it's more fun and it's more entertaining. That's probably a bad word to say. It's more fun. It's more well balanced of being fun and serious. Whereas with the Godzilla series, it tends to either lean hard into one or the other. A lot of Showa Godzilla movies take themselves seriously, and a lot of other ones take themselves less seriously. Only a few really balance a good mix of both. Not a bad thing, but Ultraman is way better at balancing being dark and light at the same time. And also to talk about the monsters, yeah, there's a lot of various monsters throughout this show. There's a lot of variety. There's aliens, there's reptilian monsters, there's bipedal monsters, quadrupedal monsters, a couple mammalian monsters, um, insect monsters, reptilian monsters, plant monsters. There's a huge amount of variety here. Sometimes you get 2 monsters in one episode. Sometimes you get as many as 4 monsters in one episode. And there's a lot of variety and lots of fight scenes involving not just Ultraman, but the military taking on various monsters too. Um, and a lot of these monsters have various powers that make some more unique, some more generic. A lot of are fun to watch. There's a couple duds here and there, like there's a couple crappy monster designs here and there, but overall, there's a huge variety of monsters in this series, and again, laying the groundwork for the rest of the series to explore more of. It's a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, um, pros number 7 and 8, the kaiju action, watching monsters go on rampages, destroying cities, fighting the military and such. It's a lot of fun. Again, feels like right out of Showa Godzilla. And of course, the Ultraman battles. Whenever Ultraman transforms and arrives to defeat the monster, it's a lot of fun. The fights aren't very long because it's more expanded upon in The Return of Ultraman from 1971, but Ultraman, he can transform whenever he wants, but he only has a limited amount of time to fight and defeat a monster. In The Return of Ultraman, it's specifically stated that he has a 3-minute time limit before he has to transform back into his human form. I don't really think it's every episode 3 minutes, but the fights generally are very short. But because the episodes themselves are short, I think for Ultra Q, each episode, for the original Ultraman, it's also 24 minutes apiece. And because the pacing is pretty quick, you don't have to wait too long for Ultraman to show up. And whenever he shows up, most of the time, it's a lot of fun to watch Ultraman fight monsters. Ultraman himself, as a physical fighter, he's mostly a grappler and a wrestler, though over the course of the show, he does incorporate more punches, chops, and especially kicks into his fighting style. But Ultraman himself, he's very much like a grappler, kind of like a judoka, someone who's heavily trained in judo. He likes to lift monsters over his head, throw them over his shoulder, swing them around by his tail, and throw them on the ground. And then finishes them off with a Specimen beam. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're highly entertaining. They're very colorful, very whimsical, sometimes pretty gruesome because Ultraman likes to, again, dismember his foes with his Ultra Slash. And watching Ultraman do all these special moves with his beam attacks, it's a lot of fun to watch, and it's highly entertaining. Pro number 9 is the music. Karo Mabut. I don't remember. Oh, Kunio Mayuchi did the music for this show. He sounds very different from Akira Fukube in a good way. There's lots of really good music for this show. It's exciting. It can be kind of spooky when the show is being a little more spooky and taking itself more serious. But for the most part, it's very light. It's very whimsical. It's very catchy. And then, of course, there's the Ultraman theme song. This would be something that this series also starts as well. Every subsequent Ultraman show would have their own theme song that would play during the opening credits. And with this one, it's just called Ultraman Theme by the Misuzu Children's Choir. And I'm going to sing a little bit of it to you, just like with Kamen Rider. Dun 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 dun. Many dekeru marakyuaju ze minna no testo de dekira kuzu hikari ga kuru kara momonaku tare ni Ultraman. I'm bad at Japanese, so apologies to anybody who speaks Japanese. I'm kind of bad at actually speaking it. I used to be really good at singing these songs. The original Ultraman theme is not one of my favorites, but it is a catchy song. And it'll get stuck in your head as you binge this series. But it's a good song. It's catchy. It's fun. It's lighthearted. And it's perfectly harmless. So the music overall is pretty damn good. And the last pro number 10, is the special effects are pretty damn awesome. They're kind of rough around the edges because initially, I don't think this show had nearly as big of a budget as Ultra Q. I think the franchise did, like, after this show, like Return of Ultraman and Ace and Taro and so on and so forth, that would get a bigger budget as the franchise would go on. But I don't really think this show was quite as expensive as Ultra Q. But for the most part, the effects are pretty solid. It looks about as good as a B production in a Toho film, like Son of Godzilla or Ebro Horror of the Deep, or maybe not quite King Kong Escapes level, but something along those lines. But still, it's also a TV budget. And for a TV show, the effects are pretty damn solid. The miniature sets are well made. Like, the cities look great. The mountainscapes look great. The various island and different planet sets look great. The space stuff looks really good too. All the flying vehicles look pretty solid. You rarely ever see the wires. The monster costumes look really good. There's a couple here and there that look pretty shitty. I actually think for the first this is me talking about bad stuff. I want to talk about the good stuff. Ultraman's costume after episode 13 looks pretty solid. But this is how he looks, and especially this mask here. This is Type C, would be introduced, I believe, in episode 31 and would be kept around for the rest of the series. And this design overall is what Ultraman would ultimately look like by episode 31. All the beam effects look really good. The explosions look great. The monster fights look really good. Overall, the special effects are really solid. Not quite as good as Ultra Q, but like a hair's breadth difference. And overall, yeah, the effects are great. Oh, and the optical animated beam effects look really good too, as well as the explosions. I already said that, but yeah. With that being, with all the good things about this show that can be said, I sadly have a few cons. I'll start with. No, I'm not going to count that one. I was going to say con number one is the bad episodes, but I'll talk about that once I'm done with my nitpick and cons. So, speaking of which, I'll start with my nitpick. This series is very prototypical, to be expected because it's the first Ultraman show. That's to be expected. There's a lot of stuff here that's fun to watch, but the later installments of the franchise would do a lot more with them. Not bad by any means, but if you watch more of the later franchises and then you come back to this original series, it can feel retroactively a bit restrained and limited, but I don't really think that's a huge problem. But you can clearly tell that this is a very prototypical show. And a lot of stuff it done here is great. There's others that the franchise has improved and even perfected later in the franchise. Not bad, but still, you can tell that this show is very prototypical. I have mainly 3 cons with this show. The least of which is there are some shoddy effects in this show. Sometimes the monster suits look pretty cheaply put together, and sometimes it kind of feels like this show was a little rushed, mainly with its monster suits. Like the second Red King episode, Mysterious Comet Suifon, it's supposed to be a different Red King, and they have a different face design. Like the first Red King had black eyes, but the second one has very prominent white eyes. But the main thing that really sticks out like a sore thumb about the second Red King suit, it's pretty obvious how the suit actor gets into Red King's suit. There's a zipper in the back, and there's a flap of the skin that they either sew shut or Velcro shut. But on Red King's tail, there's a big bulge or flap where the suit looks like it's loose, and it flops around whenever Red King is fighting a monster, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. There are some times where you can see the wires, and you can tell that some of the sets look like sets. And they just kind of weren't shot all that well. Like there's not a whole lot of that camera work that Tsuburaya did in the Godzilla series to make the monsters look big by like filming them from low angles and slowing down the camera speed to make them look like giant monsters. A lot of this is just shot straight on, and sometimes it's the city sets. The city sets mostly sometimes do just look like sets. You can tell that's definitely not a city. That's just a set. This must have been one time when they were a little rushed. The weakest effect in this show, in my opinion, I hate to say it, is the Ultraman suit itself for the first 13 episodes. There are 3 different suit variants for Ultraman throughout the show. There's Type A, Type B, and Type C. The worst of all of them is the Type A suit. Let me see if I can find a photo of it. Okay, that's a possibility. So let me see if I can find another one. Okay, so now that's about as good as it gets. So this is the Type C design. It's a very smooth mask, has a very smooth suit with obviously distinguished lines and patterns on his suit, and good-looking gloves and good-looking arms to make Ultraman look a bit more buff. Um, but with the original Type A suit, this is what it more looked like. You can see that his chest pattern is a bit more rough and a bit more rounded. But the main problem is Ultraman's mask. The mouth is very disjointed and very deformed, and his mask it's not smooth whatsoever. It's not like the Type C mask. Here's a better example. You can tell that Ultraman's face is not smooth, and his eyes aren't perfectly symmetrically oval. They're kind of asymmetrical and they're a bit wobbly. But the main problem is how uneven. Like this suit actually right here for this picture. By the way, that's Antlar right there. This suit was made for one of the Ultraman Mebius movies, and it was made as a tribute to the Type A costume for some reason. And I've never been a big fan of that decision because the Type A costume, in my opinion, looks awful. It looks so cheap and it looks so poorly put together. The show around it is still fun, but especially whenever they zoom in close on Ultraman's mask, how bad his eyes look and how bad his mouth looks and how unsmooth the mask design is. It's just so bad and so cringy, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. That to me is honestly the weakest effect in the entire show. It's only for the first 13 episodes, and then the Type B. The Type B design, this is kind of a bad photo too. The Type B design, it looks very similar to Type C, although the arms aren't quite as wide. It was just a more streamlined, smooth design on his costume, but it was just like a skin suit for Ben Furuya. But the mask was greatly improved. It looks kind of like this. Ultraman's mouth is smooth, and his eyes don't look like this. This is a bad photo. You can tell Ultraman's eyes are asymmetrical here, but the eyes are symmetrical. The mask is smooth and shiny, and it doesn't. And Ultraman's mouth is one piece, unlike for the Type A costume where it's two pieces clearly. But yeah, the Type A costume for Ultraman is easily the weakest effect of the whole show. Sadly. There are also a couple crappy blue screen effects throughout the show and some crappy props that just look so obviously like props for monsters and missiles and even Ultraman himself. Whenever Ultraman flies, it's just one static plastic piece about this big that doesn't move, and you can clearly tell that it's just hung on wires. Overall, the effects are good about 80% of the time. It's kind of rough around the edges, but for the most part, it's good. But there are some noticeably bad effects throughout the show. That mostly has to do with its prototypiness. Con number 2 is that while a lot of the monster fights are fun, sometimes, unfortunately, this would plague most of the Ultraman franchise. The fights are short. Now, a lot of times they're fun, but a lot of times they're also pretty anticlimactic. There's a couple Ultraman fights that last barely a minute. And it's frustrating as hell because I like giant monster action. I like watching action scenes with Ultraman fighting other monsters. And then to have Ultraman finally show up, but then he's barely on screen for a minute or 2 minutes, it's kind of maddening. Sadly, Ultra 7 is probably one of the worst examples of an Ultraman series that does that, but more on that whenever I review Ultra 7. And there's also some anticlimactic endings in that the Ultraman defeats the title monster so easily. And it's insanely anticlimactic. Sometimes it literally just is Ultraman shows up, he just kind of stands there and like maybe punches the monster once and dodges its attack, and then fires his Specimen ray, and boom, there's the end of the monster. The Green Mons episode in particular always comes to mind because that's what literally happens. Ultraman transforms, he stands there, he dodges Green Mon's poison spray attack, he punches it once, and then kills it with his Specimen ray. That's it. Very anticlimactic. The last con that I have with this show, the cast is good, the characters are likable, but like with Ultra Q, they don't really progress throughout the series. How they're established in the title in the beginning episode, they kind of stay that way for the rest of the series. Sometimes they'll go through a character arc in a certain episode, but then that character arc is forgotten the next episode and it's never brought up again for the rest of the series. Like in episode, I think 11, called Pearl Defense Force, I think it's called. Fuji is acting all pissed off about she's a little sexist towards men, thinking, "Oh, I like pearls and all men want to do is just sell off pearls and make money." And then she has to get over that prejudice. But then the next episode, they never talk about that again. Or Don't Shoot Arashi, one of the last episodes of the series, Arashi has to learn in order to get over his trigger-happy tendencies. But then for the rest of the series, he's still a trigger-happy asshole. And sadly, Shin Hayata, again, he's likable. He's a fun character. But how he starts out in the series, he stays that way for 39 episodes. He gets a little boring just being happy-go-lucky, get along with everybody, like everybody, solve every problem, know how to solve every problem type protagonist. Just the characters never really progress throughout the show. So if you're looking for character development, this show is going to let you down. As far as, before I give my rating, I want to talk about some of my favorite episodes, and I'll just list off in no particular order, my top 5 favorite episodes and my least favorite episodes. For my favorites, I'm going to go with number 5 is the Lawless Monster Zone. 4 is... Oh, that's what it is. The Pearl Defense Directive. That's the one where Fuji is super sexist and likes pearls. Number 4 is Demons Rise Again. 3 is... I'll count this as the Prince of Monsters, parts 1 and 2. I'll count that as number 3. The Forbidden Words as number 2, and my favorite episode of the whole series, this definitive, like number 1, Human Specimens 5 and 6. My least favorite episodes are Phantom of the Snow Mountains, My Home is Earth, The Terrifying Cosmic Rays, Pearl Defense Directive, and Oil SOS. Yeah, those are my 5 least favorites. In no particular order. So, with all this being said, the original Ultraman is a special, classic, fun series. It's a very good show. It's a very good start to a very great franchise. It's a lot of fun. If you want to watch it for giant monster action and Toho style science fiction, alien, kaiju galore action, this show is right up your alley. I was originally gonna give it a 8.5, but now I think I'm just gonna give it a solid 9. It's a little rough around the edges. It's a little prototypical, but it's still a great start, a great show to a great franchise. I highly recommend you check this out. And of course, because it's the first Ultraman show, of course, it's a good place to start. So I highly recommend this. Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. Look forward to future episodes of Super Ultra Binge. I don't know when Ultra 7's coming out. I still have to finish that show. Do you have plans to check out Shin Ultraman when it comes out in the US? Of course I do. Come on now. Look forward to next episode of Super Ultra Binge, but especially look forward to next week's video with a review of an Ultraman inspired piece of media that is pretty fucking bad, with a review of the original Neon Genesis Evangelion. Fuck. But as always, go out and if you see a giant ball of red or blue light flying through the air when you're in your jet craft, crash into the blue one, because you'll fuse with a giant alien superhero and your life will be so much better. And I will see you guys in the next video. Shwat. Shit.